Hello, everyone, and welcome all. We're so excited for you all to be here. And welcome to Trauma Informed LA's 5th annual IPV Revolution event. This year, we will be discussing creating intersectional community solutions to uplift Black parenting. And before we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the original stewards of the land where our event takes place today. TILA acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of Tobangar, which today is the Los Angeles Basin and Channel Islands. We are committed to uplifting the names of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. We also want to acknowledge the suffering and forced unpaid labor of enslaved Africans and African Americans, which enabled the start of this country. If you feel led, please put the name of the ancestors you would like to acknowledge today in the chat. Thank you all. And before we start our program, we want to share a few housekeeping items with you. There will be more information about these and other events, as well as other information from the organizations collaborating to bring you our program tonight on our virtual resources that will be sent after tonight's event. I would like to take a moment to thank those of you who are joining us via live stream and YouTube Live from around the world. And before we start our program, we want to share a few housekeeping items with you. Since we're live streaming, it also means that we are recording tonight's presentation. Please feel free to use the chat room to express acknowledgement of what we said tonight. Happy faces, thumbs up, snaps, all of that are good. And please do keep the chat room nonviolent. We will also be using the chat box for our Q&A session as well. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and leave them in the chat so that we can come around and answer them. And now I will be handing it off to Kristen to introduce Trauma-Informed LA and provide us a gratitude moment before we begin. Thank you all for joining us, and we're so excited for tonight's event.
Hi, my name is Kristen Lee, and I am a steering committee member for Trauma-Informed LA. Trauma-Informed LA, TILA, is an all-volunteer grassroots organization founded in 2014. TILA's mission is to foster resilient communities that promote healing and well-being through collaboration, education, and community engagement. We started out as 10 social justice activists on a rainy day in LA in November 2014, and now there are over 3,000 folks who have participated. Please follow our podcast, Our Stories Matter, a podcast celebrating the complex lived experiences of activists and healers through storytelling. Our Stories Matter centers on healing through activism, film, art, music, breath, or movement. Each guest brings a unique story, but one with the global theme of community healing and liberation through storytelling. Our current third season focuses on healing after incarceration. As journalist Lauren Gilgert profoundly states, the power of the story will save us all. For our gratitude practice, before we get started, I would like to take a moment to create a space of gratitude for our panelists and for our resilience. And then before we get started, I would like to take a moment to create a space of gratitude for our panelists, for our resilience through the practice of chalice lighting. So that means that I will light a candle. I do have a candle present, so I'll do that. Give me I'll light a better candle than this. So give me a moment. Okay, a much better candle. We light this chalice in memory of the courage of those who have struggled for freedom, the persistence of those who have struggled for justice, and the love of those who have built communities to carry on the light of hope. In the words of James Baldwin, in this passage, he wrote, "White Americans, any real change implies the breakup of the world as one has always known it, the loss of all that gave one an identity, the end of safety. And at such a moment, unable to see and not daring to imagine what the future will now bring forth, one clings to what one knew or dreamed that one possessed. Yet it is only when a person is able, without bitterness or self-pity, to surrender a dream they have long cherished or a privilege they have long possessed, that they are set free. They have set themselves free for higher dreams, for greater privileges. Thank you for sharing this practice of gratitude with us. I would now like to introduce Dr. Brenda Ingram from the USC Keck School of Medicine, Relationship, and Sexual Violence Prevention Services, our partner for tonight's event. Well, you're on mute, Dr. Ingram.
Thank you for that timely reminder to come off of mute. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kristen. It's a pleasure being here with you all this afternoon for what I think is going to be a very important conversation. I want to say a little bit about our program at USC Student Health. I direct the Relationship and Sexual Violence Prevention and Services program, again, part of USC Student Health. We provide crisis intervention, trauma-focused therapy, advocacy services to any and all USC students who have been harmed by any gender-based violence, such as sexual assault, dating or domestic violence, stalking, gender harassment, sexual harassment, anything of that nature. We are advisors and support persons for student complainants who are going through the Title IX process, including interviews as well as hearings. We also provide we conduct primary prevention and outreach initiatives to reduce the risk factors for gender-based violence. We are out there trying to change our campus culture to one that is more safe. And so in doing that, we also provide primary prevention modules such as affirmative consent workshops for all of our incoming students that is required, as well as bystander intervention, for student organizational leadership, and also healthy relationships for our second year undergraduate students. We do awareness raising events, plus targeted outreach and education of various student cohorts, academic programs, as well as faculty and staff. We are also here tonight to provide assistance for anyone who may feel that what we are talking about or the content of our statements may be triggering or activating, may bring up your own uncomfortableness around these issues in terms of past experiences. And so in order to accomplish that, just please send a message to Trauma Informed LA in the chat box, and they will give you a breakout room to meet with, to where we have a safe person who will meet with you in private. And so for our USC students, we also provide 24/7 coverage for crisis intervention. Again, for anyone who needs to talk, you can call us at the Student Health Well number, and that number is 213-740, the word WELL, W-E-L-L, or that's 213-740-9355. And there will be someone, a clinician there to assist you, or one of our RSVP advocates. I would also like to take this time to thank our other event partners and sponsors. I wanted to give a shout out to Torrance Brandon Reese for the great music that we have. Thank you to our partner, Los Angeles County Family Children Community Advisory Council. And thank you to our sponsors, the NASW USC Unit, USC Black Social Work Caucus, and Rainbow Services for sponsoring this event. And a final thank you to all of those joining us via live stream and YouTube live from around the world as we continue to battle these unprecedented times. Now, it's my true pleasure to tell you a little bit more about our moderator for tonight. Dr. Ramona Merchant is a compassionate leader with over 20 years of experience in Los Angeles County Public Service as a trainer, a coach, an advocate, and administrator. She earned her MSW and DSW from USC Suzanne DeVore Peck School of Social Work. Ramona is a licensed clinical social worker, using her skills to dismantle oppressive systems and assist communities in achieving authentic community care and equitable systems of care. Got to have both of those. So Ramona channels her passions to develop innovative ways to support vulnerable and marginalized communities. She currently assists in creating community and cross-sector partnerships to address issues of equity, disproportionality, and disparity for children, youth, and families of color impacted by the child welfare system, as well as the incarceration systems or criminal justice systems. Ramona's volunteer work includes serving as a member of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's African American Advisory Board, and she serves as the Development Management Coordinator on Trauma Informed LA Steering Committee. Ramona has lectured and trained on various topics in the area of child welfare, racial equity, leadership, and trauma. Without further ado, I want to have Ramona join us.
Wow. Wow. She sounds pretty cool. Thank you, Dr. Ingram.
Welcome.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ramona Machan, and I will serve as the moderator for this amazing panel tonight. I'm so excited as we explore stories of Black parents encountering the intersection of intimate partner violence and oppressive systems. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce the beautiful Black women that are going to be sharing this stage with me tonight. So starting out, and in no particular order, I have Sister Tanika Drake, who is a survivor of domestic violence and many other things. She is the author and a public speaker and advocate. Her first book is titled The Gift of Finding God's Love, Guilt and Shame Turned into My Shine. You guys got to check that out. It reveals a true life story of survival. It's a narrative of the small and big tragedies and victories that the author has experienced in the journey of life. Her poetic passages in the book show readers how faith and commitment to God can save a life. She's also a veteran. She's a United States Air Force veteran, such as myself, who is 100% disabled and a mother of 4 children, 2 of whom have special needs. She's dedicated to lift the spirits of her audience and inspire them with her life. So welcome, Tanika Drake. Next up is Dr. Tiffany Dukes, who is a sister, a colleague, and a friend. She is a native of Los Angeles, such as me. She's a double Trojan. Yeah, so am I now, right? And former athlete at USC. Dr. Dukes earned her doctorate also from the Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work, where her research centered on implicit bias within the child welfare system. Her current work also focuses on racial disproportionality and disparity of African American children and families within systems and implementing programs to combat disparate treatment. For nearly 2 decades, Dr. Dukes has provided supportive and reunification services to child welfare with involved children and families impacted by intimate partner violence. Dr. Dukes uplifts African-American parenting by examining data around father involvement, paternal relative engagement, and effective Black parenting, as it truly takes a village to raise a child. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dukes. Next up is Latoya D. Council. Latoya is a PhD student. All right, you're going to be a doctor soon too, Latoya. And her area of study is sociology, also at our alma mater, USC. She's a feminist activist, and her research is framed around social justice. Her current research project examines work, family, and self-care practices among heterosexual Black middle-class couples. And she's also the author of the first children's book about intersectionality called Intersection Allies. I have got to get that. We Make Room for All, published by Doder Press. So we have to put that link on our resources. Black feminism, intersectionality, and the power of love frames how Latoya views the world and her place within it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, soon to be Dr. Council. Next up, Dr. Allison Monterosa of Cal State San Marcos. She is also a sociologist and an assistant professor in ethnic studies at Cal State San Marcos. Her areas of specialization address racialized gender-based violence, the criminal legal system, state violence, and health implications of racism. As a community-based researcher who centers the experience of racial ethnic marginalized communities, her research and teaching pedagogy emphasizes structural and cultural competence and intersects with community and service work to promote social justice and health equity. Dr. Monterosa is an associated member of the Center for the Study of Prevention of Gender-Based Violence at the University of Delaware and an affiliated member of the University of California, Riverside School of Medicine Center for Health Disparities Research. Her work has been published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, Feminist Criminology, and Rutgers Criminal Law and Criminal Justice books. So again, welcome. Last but certainly not least, and I'm so fortunate to have this beautiful woman on with me tonight, is Dr. Brenda Ingram. She was so gracious to introduce me today, and her bio does not reflect probably an inkling of what she has done in her life, but I'm going to read it anyway. So Dr. Ingram is a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry in the USC Keck School of Medicine, and she directs, as she said, the RSVP prevention services at USC Student Health. She chairs the trauma-informed work group at the USC Student Health, and she has an extensive background in gender-based violence as an educator and mental health practitioner. She provides training and consultation for organizations interested in becoming more trauma-informed. I want to extend a large welcome to all of our Tilla Table featured guests today, and let's get started. So, amazing women. The first question I have for you tonight is, what is intersectionality? What is that, and how does it apply to Black parenting in the intersection with intimate partner violence?
Well, I guess I can lead us off. Intersectionality was a term that was coined by, oh my God, Kimberly Crenshaw. All of a sudden I had a brain stuck. And basically what that theory talks about is the need for us to recognize that we all have multiple social identities, and that these social identities can all experience their own oppressive structural oppression related to them. And so if we're going to be working with, say, a Black female or a Black woman, we need to recognize her identity as a woman and as a Black person come together to possibly create more stress, distress, as well as trauma. And so the more social identities that someone has, the more they intersect to heighten the impact of health disparities as well as social inequities.
Wow.
Feel free, anybody, to add or
You know, that was amazing. Tanika, I want to hear your take on it from a community perspective and as a survivor. What do you think about the concept of intersectionality as it relates to being a Black parent and intimate partner violence survivor?
Well, for me, the difference for me, because what she just said is so beautifully articulated, the disadvantages and the advantages as a community person, you don't get to really express your identity. You don't get to express how you need assistance. So when you are looking for assistance in the community, you may come across as aggressive, irate, just a person looking for something, but because of skin tone and previous history. And for me specifically, I'm a veteran. So I'm kind of a no nonsense. I'm going to give you what I need. And my tone of voice sometimes is not that of pretty. It's very monotone and serious, like, well, you must be very aggressive. No, I need something and I need you to get it to me. And if you're not going to, we have nothing else to talk about. I'm not angry. And so this is what has happened to me with some other people working within the system. I see you're angry. No, you actually don't. And no, I am not. I'm trying to convey a message to you. You asked me a question, I gave you an answer. So because my tone is not all flowery, now you've assumed that I am now trying to escalate what I need and how I am giving it to you and my point of view. So that is kind of different for me in a few regards. So sometimes I have to change tones, not that I want to, but because I've seen what's happened before, I have to change it so it's not so aggressive in the way I perceive to other people. So it's perception.
Yeah, I totally see that in regards to the perception piece. Any other thoughts about that before we move on with this conversation, ladies?
I can so agree. I've had that happen to me, and it's interesting that a lot of times I'll get that from white males in power who, again, are intimidated by, my education, my position, and will come to me in a way that's like, oh, you're angry. Oh, you are intimidated. I remember I had a doctor say to me one time, did you know that you can be intimidating? And my response, as I when I thought through that, one, I was angry that you would bring that to me in that kind of a way. But secondly, I felt that I had to justify my existence and explain myself, that I've worked in hospitals with doctors and multidisciplinary teams all the time. It has never been an issue. But then also I'm thinking, well, it's not that I'm intimidating, it's that you are intimidated by me.
Right.
I saw that and I thought that was just the perfect thing to have with that. And so based on your social identities, you may be given grace or you may be given hell. And so we have to constantly shift who we are to fit our environment, which again is part of survival. But again, it's based on how we are perceived by others and not necessarily what we are putting out. And so I think we have to always look at both of those pieces attached to when we're talking about intersectionality, because not everybody who's even angry will be addressed in that sort of a way or looked as being aggressive, may be seen as assertive. And so
Right.
again, depending on your identity, you get different labels that come into play in terms of how people will interact with you.
You're absolutely right, Brenda. And I think that kind of leads us into this next question that I'm talking about. We do see white supremacy threaded through different systems. So how do we dismantle white supremacy within systems of care that often re-traumatize Black mothers, judge them, and kind of cloak them with this level of bias? And I'll start with LaToya.
Yes, thank you for that question, Ramona. And to kind of like tie in with going with the conversation, as everyone was speaking, I was thinking about the women that I interviewed and what the scholarship has said about, just entering in white spaces, particularly like how to, raise their children with a very healthy Black identity in a nation state that's set on harassing them, making them, question their Blackness, making them feel unsafe, particularly think about like Dawn Dow's work about mothering while Black, where she spoke about Black moms being concerned about raising their sons in a world that does not value Black men. I saw the similar parallels with the women that I spoke to. And so I think we're looking at like childcare centers, right? Like these controlling images of Black women as welfare queens, or these ideas of Black women as angry, and how those racist images, I think, impact where you put your child. Like if you're going to the childcare system, even trying to advocate for your children, you can't even do that safely because society deems you as being angry, misinformed, not worthy of being respected in these spaces. And that's why intersectionality is so important.
Dr. Dukes, I know you have some insight on this topic as well.
I do. Hi, everyone. And I loved what Dr. Ingram and Tanika shared about just intersectionality. And even as a provider, I think it's mandatory to consider the various intersectionalities of a person when you're providing services, because it's like, how can I curtail a service or provide a service to you holistically if I have not assessed you holistically, if I'm not considering all the parts that make you you, right? Especially in the child welfare system, we get to a point where we're like, oh, okay, if this is a domestic violence or intimate partner violence, this is how we need to service a case. But the violence or the IPV is just one part of that person and their experience and how they navigate the world, right? So I think intersectionality is very important in not only creating services, but delivering services. And the second part about dismantling white supremacy is I think we have to also understand, something all of the speakers mentioned is how we're perceived, and understanding how much pressure that is to have to guess how I have to present in this moment to this person so that I can get what I need, or what words I have to say, or what clothes I have to have on, or how my hair has to be, styled. I see most of us on this panel have natural hairstyles, and we had to have a law created so that we can show up this way, how our hair naturally comes out of our scalps, you know? So I don't think a lot of people, especially systems, understand the automatic pressure that comes when people of color, specifically Black people, have to interact with programs and systems, and the pressure that is innately involved in that interaction. So I think for us to start dismantling that is, one, we have to stop with the Eurocentric expectations of, okay, this is how a person should present when they have something to say. No, I get to present how I want to present because this is affecting me, and how I'm dealing with it is my own, and I get to. And I mean, especially when we're talking about child welfare, if you're coming and telling me you're coming to take my child, am I supposed to really smile and just be joyful and, you know, just happy? No, I'm hurt, because I know if anybody feels as attached to my children as I do, like, I'll die for these ones. I'll kill for these two, you know? So I don't understand a lot of the expectations we place on hurting people, especially hurting Black people.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, Tiffany, I agree. I think that working within, particularly the child welfare system, we kind of like we run through these set of rules that we have, right? At the same time, we're trying to engage parents with cultural humility, you know, and it makes me think, like, what is it going to take? What kind of steps do we need to create? We're making steps, and by no means am I defending the child welfare system as I sit here today, because I know that we are a broken system, but we are trying to heal, you know, as we move forward. However, again, that's going to take time. But what plans or steps do you feel need to be taken to really address structural racism within systems of oppression that really affect Black mothers and parents who have experienced intimate partner violence? I know that, as we said already, how they're perceived, if we are, you know, maybe not happy when we're coming to knock on the door, right? You know, by law enforcement or by a child welfare worker, but how we show up, we shouldn't have to change how we show up, right? That we're angry, that we're hurt. You know, you think about the over 400 plus years of oppression and racism that we've had to live through, you know, our ancestral pain that we're living through, but they want us to show up and just be quote unquote cooperative. So what do you guys think about that? What steps do you think can really start to dismantle these oppressive systems that we have to live through while we're living through a racial awakening and kind of a racial pandemic right now?
Wow. I start with, we need to go upstream. We need to step back. We shouldn't have a child, we're going to talk about defund the police. We need to defund the child welfare system. And here's why I say that before everybody who works for them comes after me. You know, I love y'all. The whole point of a child welfare system is to step in and take care of children because parents cannot. We as a society don't take care of families. If we took care of families, if we made sure that everyone had a safety net, if we made sure that parents didn't struggle financially, if we made sure that everyone had parenting classes before they had children, if we made sure that we deal with adverse childhood experiences that set the stage for health disparities and social inequities that are part of that, if we do those sort of upstream activities, we wouldn't need a child welfare system. And so I'm about dismantling the purpose of child welfare, which is to deal with kids that they may have removed and put them in a system that was never really thought through in the way that is being utilized today. Child welfare was about your parent got ill, they may have died, they needed that support immediately, a temporary solution. We have created almost a cottage industry through the child welfare system. And again, I'm not someone that can say dump it tomorrow, because I don't think that's going to work. But I am saying we need to rethink the whole vision around child welfare, because children are in the context of their families. How are we supporting families? How are we showing up as a society to support our families, especially our families of color, beyond the experience of hyper surveillance? That's how we show up. And yeah, you watch somebody 24/7 all the time. Yeah, they're gonna make a mistake. Are you there to help with that?
The pressure of being watched 24/7, right?
Hello.
The pressure in a system that wasn't created for Black people. The child welfare system, you have to know, wasn't created for Black people. It wasn't created to protect Black kids. It was created for white children. No immigrant children, no migrant children, none of those children were protected. So little Mary Ellen, for those of us who are social workers, if you learned about little Mary Ellen and the SPCA coming to save her, that wasn't a Black child,
Right.
So we think about that and we think about these layers and layers and layers of oppression. What do we do? Like, how do we move forward out of that? It's like almost like quicksand, right? So even though we want to transform into a child well-being system, what does that really look like for the community?
Well, we changed the name to family well-being system. We need to support families because families raise children. Child welfare does not. Absolutely. And so until we get that, we're going to continue to be chasing our tails and trying to fix a system that needs to be not only transformed, but reformed, and every other word you want to put it, thrown out. And then we need to step up and provide the true support that families need. Families don't end up in child welfare because they have nothing else better to do with their time. They end up because resources are fragmented, not available in abundance, and society is a hard place to make it. And so until we make that shift, that look through a different lens, we are going to continue to have child welfare system that is going to be behind the 8 ball trying to catch up, having all the issues that it's having because it was not designed to be the new parent, even though it comes under the premise of local parentis. That is, again, should be an exception, but it's becoming the rule, especially for families of color whose children get removed disproportionately than the majority children. So again, I want to go upstream and support families before they end up going into a child welfare system.
So Dr. Monterosa, I'm going to ping you on this one because I kind of want to see, particularly, again, looking at, because we know a lot of our cases come in for, the majority of cases within child welfare come in for general neglect. A lot of that is masked in substance abuse issues, which are linked to, domestic violence or intimate partner violence. It's never just one thing. It's always an intersection of something else. It never comes in. It's never just, substance abuse. It's never just IPV. It's always an intersection of something, and particularly for Black families and how they're viewed in regards to bias and the lack of culturally relevant services that are out there for Black families. How do we move upstream? What can we do?
That's a great question. And thank you for that. And it's a huge one, right? I think it begins with having these kinds of conversations, coming together to educate the public about Black women's unique experiences within these larger systems, because we understand that they intersect in this way. If we're particularly thinking about the way in which Black women are often criminalized, right? When they are actually victims of intimate partner violence. And so then they move from the social services that might be available to them and then are ushered into a criminal legal system that's biased, right? And if they're experiencing these kinds of violence where you mentioned Dr. Marchand about neglect. And oftentimes when victims are experiencing abuse and they can't parent properly, right? And so as a survivor myself, these are the kinds of things that I wanted to take a look at in my work in terms of the criminalization of Black women who are victims of intimate partner violence. And so we can see how all of these systems interconnect. And I think it begins with, in trying to disrupt these larger systems of oppression, is trying to educate the broader public, and those, of course, who are doing, providing care services, and those of us who do research around this, that we do have to have cultural humility, that we do have to take into account the structural factors that Black women experience, and those stereotypes. And I think it was Latoya and Tanika earlier, and Dr. Ingram and Dr. Dukes talking about the way in which stereotypes, Black women navigate stereotypes, and having to kind of shift all the time based on whatever experience they're having or whatever space they may be in. And that too is exhausting, for one. That too impacts on the ability to parent properly. And then you combine that, or it's compound with being victimized. And so these are the things that we need to educate the broader public about, and going in with this basic knowledge of the unique experiences that Black women have when they are engaging within these larger structures, whether it be with child welfare services, whether it be the criminal legal system, and even just accessing just basic social services more generally.
All right, Tanika, I'm going to, switch back over to you, because as a person in the community and a survivor as well, what do you think about the plan? Like, is this realistic, or do we need to shift or make adjustments to it for it to really work within the Black community? Because we already know that we are systems that come with the cloud of distrust, right? So how do we start to mend that, and what does that look like in reality?
Well, thank you, Dr. Ramona. So it's really huge. It's a humongous thing that we're going to have to adjust. So with the communications that we're doing right now with all of these different types of organizations and events, we really need more people to be involved, in order to make necessary changes. I had to go get myself involved in an organization because I am a survivor of domestic violence. Therefore, I had to go to an organization and start lending some help and assistance. So in order to break into something, you have to be in that system in order to make any type of adjustment. And for me specifically, when it comes to what you guys are talking about and we are discussing right now, there's other systems that don't even talk about it. One, namely being the Veterans Affairs. That is something where this kind of discussion needs to be in the bigger spaces that can break certain things that lead up to federal government, because the feds operate totally different from the state. And all of these community things need to be brought into certain places that have blocked out things that are going on right now. This kind of conversation needs to be where veterans are addressed, and that they also have domestic violence in IPV too, but who's talking to them? Who's going in there? How does the DOD get involved? None of this conversation is happening in these levels. What we're doing here is beautiful, but the other big systems that operate and can change and shift some things, these things need to be offered as well there. And it's kind of hard to get a liaison or somebody actually in there, because once the military does a certain kind of thing, you just don't have another way to bring in community to change some different things. So definitely more of these conversations and figuring out a way to actually get ourselves into other places where we can see, okay, there's going on this here in the child welfare system, but how does that affect a veteran that may have gone through the child welfare system, but now we got state and feds, how do we do that? And so because I was caught in the middle of that, state didn't know what to do with the feds, and the feds trump state. So what do? Like, you have to deal with the feds in order for it to make stuff make sense for the state. So all of that is a big deal, and we have to have more people involved in all different levels to start talking, to adjust and make changes. Without that, nothing can be done.
Wow. Well, I know you said talking about bringing it higher, and one of the things that we looked at, the Women's UN stated that IPV is in the shadow of the pandemic growing amidst COVID-19. So now we know that during this pandemic, domestic violence cases, IPV in general, have risen over 50%. Right? The resources are limited because the shelters have limited capacity because of social distancing. We have a lot of things going on. We talked a little bit about that last year, even in Heal the Healer, but here we are a year later, still in a pandemic, still with multiple variants, and now we're in booster shots, right? So as COVID-19 cases continue to strain health services and essential services such as IPV shelters and helplines, and they've reached capacity, what community solutions can be done to address violence against women and trans femmes in COVID-19 response? Like, can we somehow harness the responses that they're doing for that to help to create better situations for Black parents and particularly Black women in recovery efforts?
Well, Ramona, I don't necessarily have a direct solution for that, but what I would like to highlight and what I would like for people to see is, as far as to my understanding, IPV has increased amongst all people. It's not only increased with the Black community. And like you mentioned, it's because there's people being laid off, there's people who aren't able to feed their family. There's so much pressure and things happening at this time that is, making people not show up as their best, right? And I think people can understand that because it's affecting all ethnicities. But I would like caregivers and programs and systems that be to see that a lot of times our families are operating under COVID-19 drought all the time, right? But now, because other ethnicities are experiencing the pressure that we deal with all the time and are falling apart, there's this empathy and concern and let's get to it. But these are the same situations and pressures that we are expected to live under and be our best under at all times. So while I don't have a direct solution at this time, I would still, though, challenge those that are very empathetic because it's a pandemic to be empathetic to those who operate in these conditions regularly. And if you can apply that empathy now because we're in a pandemic, how about we work on changing our hearts and our minds and our thoughts and the way we engage one another to include the consideration of those who are dealing with pandemic-like situations on a regular daily basis.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, Tiff, because I know that, we know the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And that came from wanting to have this collective responsibility for the children in our society. And as you said, Dr. Ingram, regards to families. But if we're going to strengthen the community also needs to kind of like stand up and say, I'm here and hold us accountable, because I know that even though we want to move upstream and get other larger agencies to be involved, if we don't, I think we're so traumatized as a Black people that it's hard for us to stand up because we don't think, one, our voices are going to be heard, and two, as Tiffany's noted, that the actions are not going to happen for us. They may happen for others, but it's like, how can we collectively come together like old school back in the day, community, organizing and get it together for our Black parents, particularly when it comes to things like this in IPV. Like we have compounded trauma, going on with our families, and it continues every single day. Like, those of us with Black sons, we're afraid to send them out, to even drive a car, because we're concerned about where they're going to get stopped. I don't know if you guys have seen the little YouTube video where the parents are talking to their kids about, teaching them how to act if they get stopped by the police. And the father is telling his daughter about when he got stopped, and she starts crying and falls apart. That's the reality that we're living in. So how do we get the community to feel safe enough? How do we create these safe spaces so the community feels safe to be able to organize, to create help for themselves so that we can be supported by the upstream actions? So what do you guys think about that?
I have so much to say about that because I'm sorry, Toya, you can go. I'll just make this small little point, and then Toya, you could definitely take it over. So I think it even starts in education. My son, every year they talk about Martin Luther King, and he highlights him, and he dresses like him every chance that he gets. He's in the 5th grade this year. So anytime he gets to present somebody, he always does Martin Luther King. And so I asked him, I said, okay, well, are you going to be like Martin Luther King when you get older and mobilize and organize, you know, good trouble and stuff? And he was like, no, because they're going to assassinate me.
Wow,
And
that's deep.
at a young age, my baby at that time, he was in the 3rd grade, he's 5th grade now. That's what he takes away from learning about Martin Luther King every year. Yes, he was a great man. Yes, he organized. Yes, he did this, but he also got assassinated, mommy, and I don't want to die. So I feel like we're building generations. Yes, this younger generation is a lot more vocal. They're doing a lot more and they're engaged politically at a younger age. But at the same time, I think they also have a fear of completely mobilizing and protesting in completely meaningful ways, because any person that we're taught about in history who did that, they were assassinated, they were taken out, you know? So that's the little point that I do have. So I turn it back over to you, Latoya, I'm sorry.
No, Toya, it's fine. It was like to say that, I would say that it's supposed to be there's a communal sisterhood going on here, because my sister, all my girlfriends call me Toya.
I love it.
Monterosa will tell you. But to answer the question and to just tag on with what Dr. Dukes just said, you know, as you were speaking, Dr. Machana, I was thinking a lot about Black feminist thought and how part of Black feminist activism is this part about love politics, right? And not looking at the state for liberation. And I agree with Dr. Ingram that we do need to do some upstream stuff. I am all about defunding the child welfare system. And I understand that that's not gonna happen today or tomorrow, but it does need to happen. But at the grassroots level, I think a love ethics, a politics of care and concern for each other is where we need to start, because it's one thing to mobilize, right? And do that collective grassroots and coalition work. But going back to where is the love? And I'm not, you know, like loving and saying, you know, that might not be the child that I birthed, but that's a Black child in this community. So right. It's my child. So when I go to the movie theater, you know, and I'm in my community and I'm going up there to Crenshaw to the movie theater that I love, and I see a kid working behind the counter or meeting something. Okay, I don't know you, but you're still in my community, you're still my child. And it's my responsibility as an adult in our community to look after each one of these child as it is to look after each one of these adults.
Exactly, yeah.
Sisters and brothers, and start that loving care for each other and do that with politics of love, because that's so important to do that work. And I think that would get at the fear. It's just a valid fear. This fear it's real. And we need to bring love into the conversation, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I just want to add a little piece to that, because I think one of the things that we need to acknowledge is the level of trauma in our communities, not just at the individual level, but at the community level. And when communities have been traumatized, they are not able to provide the resources, the social networking that people need to mobilize. And so one of the things that I propose is that we start to have this community trauma model. How do we get everyone? Because there are people in the community who are natural leaders. How do we tap into those folks that may not be as traumatized as others and mobilize them to start to build this network? Because again, it takes a village to raise a community as much as it does to raise a child.
That's
and
right.
So how do we bring that together? And I think it is going to require some outside assistance to do that, to set some of those structures up. There are some community models of activism that are going on, and trauma theory is at the core. And so the first thing we start when we come into a community, I had gone to Flint, Michigan after the poisoning. And so part of what we were trying to do was we had to start healing. We had to help individuals heal so that they can come together. One of the things that I remember one of the residents says that I don't want to go to a meeting with a bunch of traumatized folks. I can stay home by myself and do that. And so they didn't show up. They did not show up to all the stuff that the feds had put together to support this community. People didn't show up. And when he said that, I was like, okay, I get you. That, how do we come into and engage a community to be their own saviors, their own healers? I think there's a lot of things that we can do boots on the ground around that. We can look at what's already working and build on that. Look at our churches, our barbershops, our hair salons, our nail salons,
Right.
regardless of who they are. But how do we look at those natural leaders that are in our communities and mobilize them to spread this understanding of how trauma has sucked the life force out of a lot of our communities as well as our individuals. And so we really need to be able to work at both that community or that micro level, as well as at that meso and macro level to again, make this shift, because we're trying to go for a cultural shift. We're trying to change the whole thing. We're trying to look at the whole person, the well-being, and
Right.
look at multiple aspects of that when we're talking about communities. And when communities are healthy, their residents are healthy. And so we, again, kind of step back and figure, okay, how do we help our communities to become healthier? What can we do? And again, I think going in and trying to identify those natural leaders who we can mobilize to help is significant, because it has to be by us, for us, from us. And so
Right.
again, and it may take us someone to come in and do that. To spark that what we call post-traumatic growth, if you will.
Thank you, Dr. Ingram. Wow, that was powerful. Dr. Monterosa, do you want to add any comments before we move on?
Well, I just would like to echo everything Dr. Ingram just said. I think the idea of being able to reach communities and coming from a trauma-informed space is going to be, one of the ways in which we're able to really be able to get the word out that this is something that our community is experiencing on more than, at the micro level, at the meso level, and the macro levels with institutions. And understanding the ways in which those things intersect. I think that's really important, particularly when we're thinking about the way in which we see Black women navigating, or not just Black women, but as you were stating, Dr. Ingram, Black families navigating these broader structures where they're simply not coming from a trauma-informed space. They're coming from a space that is often imbued with these negative stereotypes that exist, not just about Black women, but Black men, Black children, the idea that our children are, that they need to be policed in particular ways in which other groups may not experience the same kind of, surveillance or hyper-surveillance. So I completely and wholeheartedly agree that having a trauma-informed culturally trauma-informed model is one of the ways in which that we can reach out to the community and get people to understand the very complex ways in which African-American Black families are experiencing these broader structures of oppression.
So how do we thinking about everything that we've talked about thus far, how do we shift from a cultural competency model to cultural accessibility, cultural humility, cultural integrity? And I'll start with you, Tanika. Like, how do we really create this shift? We know there's fear in the community. We know we need to kind of uplift and target the people who are there, right, in the community and help to support and mentor them. But also at the same time, we know that we have these oppressive systems. How do we really create this shift?
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Mona. Wow, that's a bazooka. So I'm gonna do my best to address it the best way that I can. So with having cultural humility, expressing how a certain culture does certain things would be the first, for me, one of the first ways that we do that. So getting people involved in some of the creative ways that we operate, some of the things that we do, whether it be by music, whether it be by painting, some of the ways that we express ourselves so that people can have that cultural accessibility to certain things that normally would not be accessible within a different group. So maybe something for me, like in my background, there's Jamaican heritage. Well, how do I get accessibility towards that type of cultural narrative for me, as opposed to just a regular African-American person? it's kind of different because we still are dealing with the intersectionality of everything. But when you have to look at us as a people, we have a very diverse background. So with that, we have to culturally share our diversity. So you're not going to just get a person who's just African American. They may be Haitian, they're Jamaican, Panamanian. We need to express all cultural differences among us and provide that so it can be inclusive, to let people know that we are a very diverse group. And while we're trying to give people access about certain things, we got to bring it in as a whole, because there's a lot of different things that you might look at someone like, this person's Hispanic. Well, they're not. They're just from Panama and they speak Spanish, or they're from they're Puerto Rican or whatever it is. But to bring that all together, to see that what Dr. Latoya, soon to be, was saying is that there needs to be a lot more love and care and concern when we do bring this out, and not people looking at what we do as, well, this is just a harsh, aggressive person. No, you need to understand the context in which all of these things are happening, so there can be more cultural equity for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need to understand the story. And I think that even when I used to train, for DCFS as a coach, talking about cultural humility is huge, because it's really, how do you ingrain that in providers, into the staff, to be humble and to understand that you're not the expert of that mother, of that child, of that family. They are the expert of themselves, and to come into that conversation with the humbleness that I am here to learn. I'm here to know. I want to know your story, so think about it in regards to how we create a shift. So I'm going to turn to your, unbeknownst to you, Jamaican sister over here, Dr. Dukes, to talk a little bit about the shift to cultural humility.
So I was already feeling in community with all of you guys, because we're African-American fierce women, right? But then when you were like, you're Jamaican, I said, all right, big up yourself, sis. I was like, okay, she knows about ackee and sawfish and all this other, these are the intersectionalities that matter, right? Because I already loved you, but now I'm like, oh, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? What city are you in? You want to hang out? You want to be friends? But I say all that to say, and go back to the question, the cultural humility piece is, the competency. I hate when they say culturally competent, right? Because you just demonstrated in your appearing as just an African American woman, you're also an Afro-Caribbean American woman, right? So there's no way you can be competent in any of it, right? Because there's always some nuance that makes it a little different. I have a sister also who, we have the same father, but she's from the Philippines, but she looks like me, but then she speaks Tagalog. So she'll be, acting like a Black woman, and then her mother, who is Filipino, will come in the room, and then she just completely shifts. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that whole other side of you. So there's no way to be, culturally competent. But I do also feel, and we've said it already, it has to be hard work. You have to have a desire to see the person in front of you. And that's what makes it so offensive when people say they don't see color. Well, you don't see me? You're saying you don't see a huge part of me. So there's no way you can be culturally, ethnically competent, because you just completely obliterated a whole big part of me that is going to give you a little bit of insight of a story on how to best engage me, how best to serve me, how best to talk to me. And I find it funny that they can do it for other ethnicities. For example, when I was on the line, I knew if I was dealing with a Polynesian family, they are a very matriarchal culture, that I needed to talk to the elder woman in the home, to get the blessings to come into her family and start to work with her family. So I can't say I don't see color and then just completely not say that I don't see that you're Polynesian or understand any little bit of your culture. Also, I really just believe it has to be hard work. I desire to be in community with everyone, and to, we some of us have our pronouns up. All of that is a part of trying to be in community with your neighbor. And I don't think that work can change until a lot of our, not only just our mindset changes, but we talk about it at DCFS. It really has to be heart work. If your heart's not in it, you're just not going to invest in it, and you're not going to see the value of investing time into making this type of change, because it is very intentional.
Thank you, Dr. Dukes. Thank you. Hard work and intentional. Absolutely. So my next question, as we're getting closer towards the end of this amazing conversation, but I'm going to shift to talk about healing. What does healing look like for our community, for Black mothers, for Black fathers who are experiencing intimate partner violence within their relationships, seeing violence in their communities, and experiencing oppressive systems as well as systemic racism? What does healing look like? How do we create that space for our Black communities? I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ingram, since you're over there at RSVP. You're muted.
I know. I was
She's like,
trying
I'm muted on purpose.
Yeah. Well, coming from the therapist part of my life, I think there's a number of ways that we can work on healing. And I think the first way to heal is to acknowledge the pain. If you don't acknowledge the pain, it's very hard to heal. So what mechanisms do we have that provide an avenue for people to even acknowledge that they have been harmed? And also, you know, how that harm has impacted their lives. So I always want to start with just that acknowledgement. I remember going to a church where I presented on child sexual abuse. And what was really interesting was that during my presentation, or rather right after my presentation, one of the males, well, what I had said in the presentation was that I hear you, I hear everyone out there who's been victimized, and on behalf of society, I apologize for what has happened to you. And that once that apology came out, you felt a shift in the room. And I had brothers who don't get into this kind of stuff start having testimony about how they had been harmed and how it had impacted their lives. And so we have to acknowledge it, and the powers have to take ownership of what has happened, and we need to apologize. It's amazing how powerful that can be for someone in helping them to heal. Now, I can't count on that because most time that doesn't happen, but some of us who are in positions where we can apologize on behalf of, I think can go a long way in helping people to know that I hear you, I see you, and what was done to you was not okay, and it was harmful. And you are trying to do the best you can to recover and heal from that harm. But I have to start with, you were harmed. And that's not okay. And I think that's where a lot of people can start their healing, is when they have that acknowledgement. Because until that acknowledgement happens, what you see is people increasing in substance abuse, people engaging in aggressive, violent behavior, people doing a whole lot of stuff to get you to see, I am in pain. You know, that little term, hurt people, it's
Right.
real. It's real.
Right. Hurt people, and healed people heal people. So, Tanika, I know many of us who are survivors, we use advocacy or research, you know, to work our way through healing. What does healing look like for you?
Well, so for me, thank you, Dr. Ramona. For me, one of the things is self-care. That is huge. And sometimes, as much as we have been talking about that probably in different spaces, education about self-care and what that actually is can really help immensely. And if people are not aware in my community, that's not something that's always talked about. What is self-care? What is that? So if we have more of that, more education in certain parts of the community that need that can go a long way, because it's not just me sitting down and just alone in a quiet space and not talking to anybody. That could be, but there's a myriad of things that you could do. And without being educated for people to know what that actually is, whether it's journaling, singing, whatever that is, they have no clue what that even means. So when they're in a very distressed place or coming out of a very toxic environment, how do they get that out? There has to be some way to get that out, and you may not always be able to get to a therapist to express that and vocally let it out. So what can you do yourself? I have to self-care that. I have to journal it, or I have to podcast it, or some way to get whatever it is in me up and out, so it doesn't just stress me, affect my body, and then affect the way I parent my children, because I'm so filled with rage or whatever that thing has done to me. So like you said with that beautiful statement, heal people, I have to heal myself so that I can best serve my 4 children that will come into be adults. If I'm that mother that hasn't dealt with that heart work, then that is going to go into my children, and they'll be 4 adults walking around here being hurt because the mother didn't do the self-care in her own heart work.
Right.
So
Continuing intergenerational cycles of violence. I'll say we started the conversation talking about intersectionality, and I just want to take a moment to talk about, we have a lot of LGBTQIA plus parents, who are also experiencing in the Black community IPV. And what does it look like for individuals who experience IPV within that population to have access to spaces and resources that are affirming and competent and understanding for them, so that that space is safe to be able to provide for the Black community within that population, for them to heal? Any thoughts on that? Dr. Monterosa, I see you shaking your head. Do you have any comments?
So I think part of what we have to do as a community is to be able to raise awareness of those unique intersections, right? We're talking about the way in which people's different, embodying different socially marginalized identities, and that there are going to be unique experiences, and to be able to provide services and particular kinds of knowledge so that people feel supported, so that they do feel that they, one, will be believed. If we're specifically talking about intimate partner violence, the child welfare system, the criminal legal system, and being able to provide those services where they are feeling as though that they can come and speak and show up as in their full self, because I think that's pretty much what we are trying to cultivate spaces for Black people to show up in all identities, right? And so we have to be able to make sure that we are providing those kinds of safe spaces so that folks get the kinds of services and the help that they need. In terms of the different kinds of research that I do, I look at the different kinds of criminalization that Black women experience. And certainly when we're thinking about who is doing the research on, about us, I venture to argue that it needs to be us. Right. It needs to be people who are connected to the communities that we are doing research about and with, because that's going to shape and mold the kinds of questions that we ask, and shape and mold the kinds of interventions, right? In fact, if that's in fact what we're doing with the kinds of research that we do, the kinds of interventions that have often been put in play for Black folks and Black trans women, femme, are often harmful. They often lead to further criminalization. They often lead to further kinds of harm. And so I think it's important when we're thinking about it from a research perspective that we are bringing folks to the table who are connected to those communities so that they can better provide different kinds of prescriptions and proscriptions, and also allowing folks to tell you what it is that they need. Right. And having that kind of humility, right, as researchers and caregivers and service providers. Yeah, thank you for that. That is something that we often are trying to figure out is how do we better reach these communities that are
Right.
on the margins, right?
Right.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So special guest, Ebony Williams, I know you have some thoughts on this. Would you like to on mic or come on camera and talk a little bit about your thoughts on this topic before we move on?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important conversation to have, especially about the intersections of queerness and about what it actually means to have queer folks part of this piece specifically, because often they're left out. And I think there's a need for more training, for better training and education, and really bringing it in the intersections and not being an afterthought. Because folks need to know from the beginning, how are we supporting queer folks? Because somebody may show up to get support and never show up, never come back because they don't receive the appropriate support they need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ebony. I absolutely agree that you need to have every single person at the table, and it's like nothing about us without us. You can't create services for a generalist Black community when we know that there's so many intricacies and complexities within the Black community for the different interpopulations among us. So thank you so much. So as we get closer to the close, I'm going to ask you guys a couple of more questions, one from the audience and one from us. But as one of the last questions, what are some of the action steps you can take so that we don't have to rely on oppressive systems such as child welfare, the police system, the justice system? What are some steps that you feel you yourself or we as a community need to take?
I think community needs to start being responsible for community, and community is everyone that's in your community. So I'm not sure which one the lady spoke, like, you know, if I'm going to the theater in Crenshaw and I see a kid, yes, that's not my bio kid, but that child is a part of my community. So that is now my child. And, you know, hold us accountable. Like the department, I think, you know, I'm one of those people who, you know, I work for the department, but I would love to work myself out of a job to where the community is strengthened and the community demands what it needs from the department. The department listens, the department provides that, and the department becomes a last resort as it was intended to be, rather than a first resort, because community bands together and community wraps around that family. And then if all else fails, then they're like, okay, DCFS, we may need your help. So I think it starts with community taking responsibility of one another, being in community with one another, and then going to the systems united and saying, you know, what you provided, not only just saying what you provided isn't sufficient, but coming with solutions. Like, okay, this is how you guys normally do things per this policy, but what if we did it this way? You know, DCFS is in the process of changing, you know, its funding source, where we are doing a lot more preventative work and building communities of hope and asking genuinely for community to allow us to partner with them. So that responsibility shifts from DCFS to the community. And we are now co-creating as a result of listening to what the community said it needed. So I think also the community needs to identify what does the community need to take care of one another, and then let the department know, and then hold us accountable to that.
I love that. Identify, let us know, and hold us accountable. Like do, all three things. Okay, so LaToya, AKA Toya, what are your action steps?
My action steps, thank you for that, is first, I mean, I agree with everything that Dr. Duke said, and I would just add, you know, be accountable of myself first. Like, what do I need? How do I need to show up as a Black woman, a Black cisgender heterosexual woman in this space? And where do I need to grow, right? And doing that self-work, because I think, you know, going back to full circle, hurt people. And so heal people, heal people. And so constantly, and when you heal, recognizing that healing is not one and done, but it is ongoing. That you have to be flexible for yourself. And you have to learn how to, that loving kindness that you want to give out to everybody else, you got to give inward first. Because it's just ongoing. It's just self-discovery, self-acceptance, self-care are ongoing things, and they're so important. And walking out with that energy, because I'm all about energy, that light, I think people will see that and it will spread. And then go to the community level and say, okay, I'm going to stand in solidarity with you. I'm going to get out of the way when I know that I can't really speak here, and give you space and make room. And then we're going to advocate together on behalf of all of our needs, right? And I think that's what we need to do. And we've done this. We've seen this in history among the Black community. So it can be done. And, and I'm hopeful that we will continue to do that.
Yes, hope and inspiration for me too. I'm going to go next to Dr. Monterosa. What are your action steps?
So yes, thank you for that. I just like to echo everything everyone just said. I am totally in agreement with you, Toya. It's this idea of allowing, doing self-introspection and allowing oneself to continue to learn and grow. When we're thinking about, as I was speaking about this earlier, the idea of coming from a perspective that, centering research, the idea that we need to be able to allow for folks to do the kinds of work with communities that they are connected to, as opposed to going in and saying, oh, I am going to prescribe particular interventions for this group without understanding and knowing what it is and asking what it is that the particular group may be needing or are concerned about. So I think that's important. Also, I'm thinking about the idea of understanding that when we're thinking about stereotypes and the way that they impact Black women, kind of holding space for that righteous anger that we often have and are told to kind of push down. And I'm going back to what Tanika was talking about earlier, in the idea of knowing that we may feel a particular way when we're experiencing different kinds of oppressions and the different systems that we engage in, but then caring for ourselves by acknowledging that pain, acknowledging that the righteous anger that we often have. And I'm thinking about Dr. Brittany Cooper's work, where she talks about eloquent rage, and that it being not only a real lived true emotion that is righteous and valid, but also moving that particular kind of energy into positive spaces to enact social change. And so I think that's part of my action steps. That's kind of the drive that I have that keeps me doing the work that I do and advocating in the way that I do for Black women, Black families more broadly.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Monterosa, for the work that you do. Dr. Ingram, what are your action steps?
Wow. There's so many. I think healing, in order to free up this energy, is going to be really important. So how do we help communities, individuals heal from the trauma? Again, as I said before, first we start with acknowledging that these things have happened, that they have been harmful, and that people have been harmed. And I think from there, once we start to acknowledge, we move into some models where we look at healing. And we also need to dismantle and acknowledge structural violence. That's something that we don't talk about very often. And so when we're talking about IPV, what we focus on are the individuals and how that impacts them, without looking at how structural violence sustains IPV. And so I think we need to sort of dismantle all of that. We need to look at that in a way. We talk about cultural humility. And one of the things that I note with a lot of conversation around cultural humility is that we don't talk about step 2 and 3. We talk about step 1, which is to look inward and self-reflect. And that's a beautiful thing. You got to start there. But it's not one and done with that reflection. Is what are you going to do with that now that you have it as a service provider?
Right.
You need to address the power and privilege that you have as a provider, and how are you going to use your privilege to address structural violence, which is oppressing that group significantly. And so if you're not doing that kind of work as a provider, you're not doing the work you need to do. And so I think holding service providers accountable for dismantling their own system in some ways, I think is another action step that I would like to see happen. I've talked, I've been involved with DCFS in so many ways for 30 years now, and we've been talking about trauma-informed care coming to DCFS for a long time. And I know they even had a work group that was working on it, and I don't even know if that work group is still in play. But I think as service providers who have such intimate contact with Black families, you should not leave if you have not done that work. If you don't understand how trauma is impacting your work, if you don't understand how that child's trauma is impacting that foster home, and why those kids are moved 10 times in the span of before they're the age of 8, I think some of the research out of UC Berkeley talks about. If you don't get that trauma lens, you're going to continue to re-traumatize inadvertently, not on purpose. And so I think all of those pieces for me are action steps that I would participate in, that I would lead, that I would jump on. But I just think there's so many entry points into this process. So I just want to, again, highlight most of those.
I love it. You're dropping nuggets because I'm going to be working on parts 2 and 3. I mean, I thought I was working on them, but I think I'm going to put a little bit more intention on that. So last but not least, Ms. Tanika, what are your action steps for the community or for us?
Well, for me, it's to continue to be involved in conversations like this that have been offered to me, to lend my experience, and then to utilize the platforms that I have with social media to do my best to get my voice out there with sharing books that I've written, to add a little bit of different perspective with things that I've gone through, so I can lend that different kind of lens and perspective through the eyes of what I've gone through, so people can be like, aha, okay, that's not how things go. This is not a Lifetime movie. This is how this goes. This is a little bit different. So to get a better grasp of people, to get an understanding. So definitely want to continue to be involved and lend my story whenever I can, and be a participant in panels like this and beyond.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to thank every single one of you for joining us today for this conversation. I will end with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King before we move on to our gratitude practice. Without love, there is no reason to know anyone, for love will, in the end, connect us to our neighbors, our children, and our hearts. So we talked about heart work. So as we close today, we'd like to take a moment of centering and grounding. To lead us in the practice, I would like to introduce Ebony Williams, founder of Root Wellness Healing. And thank you again for joining us, Ebony. You're amazing.
Oh, thank you. It was an honor to listen to just the wisdom that's present on this panel. So thank you all for sharing that with all of us. And thank you everyone for being with us today. As we close out, we just really want to recognize the role of healing in all of this, knowing that it is really, really hard to heal from intimate partner violence, along with those who are doing the work to support folks moving through their process and maybe experiencing secondary and vicarious trauma yourself. And so just wanting to hold space for some grounding as we move out of the space that we're sharing together. So I'm just going to invite folks to take part in a mindfulness practice using our breath. And so I'm going to invite you to think about someone who cannot be in this space today, someone who they may have needed your words, someone who may need something, but you would like to share it with them, but for whatever reason, they're not here. They are not in the place where they are present with this information. So I'm going to invite you to think about them. And when we inhale, we're going to bring in whatever it is that they might be going through. And as we exhale, I'm going to invite you to think about something they need. What could we send them on the energy and the spirit of our breath in hopes that they will receive that? And we'll do this 3 times, 1 for someone else, 1 for self, and 1 for someone who is in this space with us. Okay. So feel free to bring your feet to the ground. You can close your eyes or allow your eyes to dully focus on a spot on the wall or on the floor. And as we begin, I'll invite you to feel your toes on the ground and your heels. Taking a deep breath in through the nose, calling up what is happening for someone who is not here with us, who may need this space and the word shared. And on your exhale, sending them whatever they need. Maybe that's food. Maybe that's the energy to get through the night or the day. And as you move to take another inhale through the nose, I want you to think about yourself. What is something you need? What is happening in your body and your mind right in this moment? Allowing yourself to inhale that and release it on your exhale, letting it go, sending that energy to you. And on that last and final breath of the moment, maybe your biggest breath of our time here together, I invite you to think about someone who may be in this space with us, something that they may need, but may not ask for. So as you inhale, breathing in through the nose, thinking about them, holding them in your thoughts and in your heart. And as you exhale, sending them whatever it is that you feel they may need in this moment. And when you're done with your practice, feeling free to wiggle your toes a little bit, moving your heels, or any part of you that feels like it needs some movement, some space, knowing that sometimes we can't be directly there, and sometimes people are not going to heed or hear our words or be in the space to. And we know that that can be the case with many folks going through intimate partner violence. They may need to be here, but they may not know that or may not have the ability to get here in this moment, but we can send them our energy. We can send them our hope. We can send them, whatever it is that may get them to that next moment or that next step. So I want to thank you for engaging in that practice, feeling free to practice this whenever or in however way works for you. Keeping folks in your spirit and keeping folks in your heart. Thank you so much. And I'll hand it over to Sarah Johnson for our final announcements.
Thank you so much, Ebony, and thank you to everyone for attending our presentation this evening. We're going to be posting in the chat a post survey and a couple of links for you as well. And as we close out tonight, we want to extend a huge thank you again to our partners, RSVP and LACFCCAC, as well as our sponsors, the USC Black Social Work Caucus, Rainbow Services, and an ASW USC unit. We also want to extend a thank you to the artists who have donated their art to this event. Jose Ramirez Art, who has our beautiful painting for us on all of our marketing materials and on our slides today, and Torrance Brown Reese, who provided the music today as we entered into our presentation. We also will be sending you all out with a resource room and a follow-up email to you to come this week. You can find all of the links to our presenters today, their organizations, as well as any work that they've done. So if you want to pick up LaToya's book, which I'll be doing as well, there is a link to that, as well as Tanika Drake's book. So you can find those in our resource room. If you've enjoyed today's event, we ask that you consider donating to Trauma Informed LA. We are a community of volunteers that are doing this work, and please feel free, if you've enjoyed, to donate to the work and to the labor to continue doing this work and continue having these brave conversations. So thank you all for being here tonight. We appreciate you and your presence even in this virtual space, and we hope you all have a great night.